I really wanted to love Supergirl. Supergirl is one of the most frustrating movies I've seen this year. Not because it's bad, because it's so close to being great. I had a good time watching it. There are fantastic performances, some genuinely great action, and I'm unbelievably excited to see this version of Kara again. This movie has all the right ingredients, but it just can't cook them into something great. The movie is an adaptation of the Women of Tomorrow comics by Tom King. It's one of my absolute favorites. It's such a deeply personal story about grief and healing. The art is stunning. Ironically, these are the exact areas the movie struggles with the most. The story follows Kara celebrating her 23rd birthday when she meets Ruthie, a young determined girl on a revenge mission to kill Krem, the man who murdered her family. After Krypto is poisoned by Krem, Kara reluctantly joins Ruthie on this intergalactic journey to find both Krem and the antidote before it's too late. Along the way, Kara keeps trying to convince Ruthie that revenge won't give her the closure she's looking for. Lobo crashes into the movie, Superman has a bunch of cameos, we learn more about Krypton, Argo, and Kara's journey to Earth. Kara is also struggling with her identity and sense of belonging. Individually, all these story elements work. However, the problem is they never come together in an emotionally satisfying way. Let me start with what I love. The flashback scenes are the strongest part of the movie. Watching Kara grow up after Krypton's destruction was heartbreaking. Those scenes gave Millie Alcock room to show just how much pain Kara has been carrying her entire life. There's one scene in particular where Kara begs her father to stay on Argo because it's the only home she's ever known. That scene really got to me. I was genuinely tearing up. Alcock completely sold me on this version of Supergirl, and I can't wait to see where the DCU takes her next. I also enjoyed the scenes between Clark and Kara. The relationship felt effortless. It was troubled, but there is an understanding and care between them. David Cornsweet reminds us why he is the perfect Superman. The moments between Kara and Krypto are just as charming. It is adorable and constantly reminds us what's actually at stake. The action is consistently entertaining. There are some genuinely funny one-liners, and visually there are some gorgeous moments. Although for a movie that visits so many different planets, why does everything look so brown and plain? After a while, every location starts blending together. If it weren't for the weird little alien creatures we see throughout the movie, I would have forgotten we're in space. Half of these planets just feel like driving through West Texas to me, not alien worlds with distinct cultures. Especially when comparing it to material it's adapting from, the movie feels lifeless. And that's what makes the flashbacks stand out even more. They're emotionally rich, visually distinct, and they give Kara the depth I wish the rest of the movie had explored. Before I get into my criticisms of the movie, I just want to make a disclaimer. Female-led superhero movies get scrutinized more harshly than male-led ones, and that's a real pattern worth acknowledging. Molly Freeman pointed this out in her Screen Rant review, basically noting that because there are so few female-led superhero films, each one gets treated like it has to be perfect to be considered successful. So when one ends up being just okay, it gets judged a lot more harshly than a similar film led by a male hero. And even though I didn't fully connect with Supergirl personally, I do want to be clear, I absolutely want DC to keep making movies centered on female heroes, especially with performers like Millie Alcock involved. So now, what didn't work for me in this movie? The biggest problem is that Kara lacks a character arc. In the movie, she's going through a lot. She's trying to save Krypto, she's struggling to accept Earth as her home, and she's also trying to steer Ruthie away from revenge. That's a lot of emotional ground to cover. A noble effort was made, but the movie fails to execute these themes in a satisfying way. In the comic, the story takes a different approach. In the final issue, we find out that Krypto isn't dying and actually doesn't need the antidote at all. Kara agrees to help Ruthie because she sees her own grief and anger reflected in her. She doesn't want Ruthie to go down this path of revenge because it will not give her the closure she's hoping for. The movie, on the other hand, is all about Kara saving Krypto. She's given a 3-day countdown to track down Krem and bring back the antidote. They explain that Kara can't just take Krypto to a yellow sun to save him because moving him would accelerate the poison. I understand the logic, and as a plot device that explanation is fine, but by changing Kara's motivations on why she is going after Krem, the movie accidentally shifts the story away from grief and towards a race against time. That's a less emotionally interesting conflict. In this way, the comic also gives us a much better understanding of Kara. She's already lived through unimaginable grief. She knows anger doesn't fix anything. The story at its heart is about a grieving girl trying to stop another grieving girl from being consumed by anger. The idea that the only real way to survive grief isn't revenge, it's learning how to keep living anyway. That's the emotional core I wish the movie had leaned into more directly. This is also why the ending feels so confusing to me. In the film, Kara ultimately kills Krem. If I were in this movie, movie, I would have also wanted to kill him. But I couldn't help but feel like that undercuts everything she's been trying to teach Ruthie. In the comic, she doesn't execute him, she banishes him, and he spends the rest of his life in prison. This version of the ending feels more consistent with the lesson at the heart of the story. The movie's version just doesn't hold the same emotional weight for me. Another major part of the movie is Kara struggling to understand her identity and where she belongs. We learn that she never really accepts Earth as home. She's still emotionally attached to Argo because that's the only home she ever truly knew. I love this idea, I just don't think the movie fully develops it. By the end, Kara does end up accepting Earth as home. But why? What moment made her come to this realization? What did Kara discover through this journey that helped her solve this internal conflict she's been feeling? I honestly can't pinpoint it. So her acceptance doesn't feel like the result of this journey, it just feels like a conclusion the movie arrives at because it has to. And that's the core issue. Kara doesn't really have a defined character arc here. She has really strong values, she's consistently good from beginning to end, she already has a strong sense of justice. So what's different about Kara by the end? I couldn't help but compare Kara's arc to Clark's in Superman. Like Kara, his values never really change. What changes is how he sees himself. At the start, he's still figuring out his identity, trying to understand what other people expect of him and who he's supposed to be. By the end, he chooses to define himself by his own values, not other people's expectations. And the movie shows that shift through specific moments. You can trace the arc. From his initial reaction to Jor-El's message to getting beaten down in a fight to confronting Luthor, we can pinpoint the specific moments that allow him to come to this realization. That's why Kara's journey feels incomplete here, because I should be able to point to those same kinds of turning points. Instead, the movie tells us she belongs without showing us how she got there. I see the same issue with Ruthie. Ruthie is underwritten. In the comic, Ruthie is the narrator, which immediately centers her in the story. She's actively shaping how we experience everything. But in the movie, she sadly doesn't feel like much of a character. Things are kind of just happening around her. She spends the whole movie wanting revenge, then ultimately decides not to because something about spending time with Kara made her realize that revenge isn't worth it. But I kept asking the same questions I had with Kara. What actually changed? What moment convinced her that revenge wasn't worth it? Up until the very last moment, Ruthie was dead set on killing Krem. Again, what was the turning point? And I think this really comes down to the fact that Kara and Ruthie lack chemistry. There's this pivotal scene where Kara is dying from being under a green sun, and they have this bittersweet moment of connection, and Kara reaches her hand out slowly to hold Ruthie's, and I felt nothing, which is saying a lot because I get emotional at basically every movie I watch, and a lovely moment like this should have got me tearing up a bit. I know I keep glazing the comics and I don't want to sound like a comic purist, but it's impossible not to compare the two. The comic works so well because it's fundamentally about their relationship, and the movie never fully develops that. Maybe that's why adapting this particular story into a huge blockbuster was always going to be difficult. It's such a personal story about grief, revenge, and healing. The movie really misses the mark on what should be at the heart of it. As an adaptation of The Woman of Tomorrow, the movie understands the structure of the comic story, but not the emotional weight behind it. I actually wish they wrote an original story for the movie and maybe picked out a few other comics to draw inspiration from. I also find Ruthie's design very underwhelming. They could have tried harder to match her comic styling with the pointy ears and the crown and just make her look a bit unique. I mean, she's one of the protagonists of the story. She needs to stand out a bit. Now let's talk about Lobo. Why is Lobo in this movie? Jason Momoa is phenomenal. He's hilarious. He looks incredible. He steals every scene he's in. But why was he in this movie? I saw somebody on Twitter make the argument that Lobo was included just to get more people interested in the movie. Normally, I'd roll my eyes at a take like that, but low-key they might have a point. I believe the studio heads didn't have faith that two female leads could bring in audiences on their own, so they added a fan-favorite male lead. If you removed Lobo from this movie, nothing would change. He is the group project member who didn't help with the assignment at all, but showed up for the presentation and somehow got the most recognition and applause. He's literally just there to aura farm. I can't complain too much because he farmed excellently. In an interview with the writer Anna Nogueira, she mentions she had to include Lobo in the movie and that she took inspiration from True Grit. True Grit is this Western movie of this young girl, Maddie, teaming up with the police officer Rooster to avenge the death of her father author sound familiar? So I haven't seen this movie, but from what I read, True Grit's influence makes sense in the overall structure of the plot, and Lobo represents the chaotic energy that Rooster has. But while Rooster constantly reinforces Maddie's emotional journey in this movie, the same cannot be said for Lobo and Ruthie. There's this scene towards the end of the movie where Ruthie and Lobo are both captured by the brigands and locked up in jail cells. I think the movie should have taken this moment to deepen their dynamic, because Lobo could have been more than just chaos in the background of the story. He could have been a second emotional counterweight in Ruthie's journey. Instead, he mostly stays on the edges of the narrative. Then there's our very one-dimensional villain, Krem, and honestly, I'm okay with that. Not every villain needs to be morally gray. Some people are just bad people. He wasn't a very interesting villain in the comics either. He serves his purpose as a catalyst to further Ruthie's story. However, the movie never fully uses him for the emotional arcs in the same way. So instead of reinforcing the themes of grief and revenge, he mostly just exists as a destination the story is moving toward. Unlike Ruthie, I actually don't mind the costume changes for Krem between the comic and movie. I like that he looks like a Mad Max character. It's more fitting for the space pirate leader that he is. Now I have to talk about the final needle drop. I've seen several mixed reviews on the use of a slowed down cover of The Middle by Jimmy Eats World for the final action scene. For me, it didn't work. For some reason, I was feeling secondhand embarrassment while watching it. It completely took me out of the movie. The weird part is, I actually think the song itself is a good choice. Lyrically, it fits. That feels like Kara reassuring Ruthie that everything's going to be okay. And visually, the scene is incredible. The slow motion action, the camera rotating with Ruthie's perspective as she watches Kara fly around fighting. It's incredible. It's the music that loses me. The cover of the song doesn't feel like Kara, and it doesn't match the energy of what's happening on screen. Honestly, if they just used the original version at full tempo, I think the scene would have landed so much better. Finally, I can't talk about a DCU movie without talking about James Gunn. Ever since Gunn was handed the keys to the DCU palace, my running thought has been, in James Gunn we trust. And I couldn't help but wonder, what if James Gunn directed this? Would it have been better? We'll never really know. But one thing we do know is that Gunn consistently nails his character relationships. He knows how to balance action, humor, and heart. He's not afraid of letting characters be sentimental. That's exactly what I think this movie was trying to imitate. It has humor, it has action, but it's missing the heart. The emotional relationship between Kara and Ruthie never lands the way it should, and Kara's struggles with finding home never reaches its full potential. I've also seen a lot of people putting the blame solely on Ana Nogueira because this is her first feature film. People online are treating that as proof as she wasn't qualified to write this movie. I don't think that's a fair criticism. You don't need decades of industry experience or a long list of writing credits to write a good movie. There was even a Variety article that was pretty brutal, targeting her, calling it one of the worst scripts they'd seen. Also, filmmaking is incredibly collaborative. The writer isn't the only person making creative decisions. It's unfair that she's become the primary target for criticism about the script. For example, going back to when she said she was told to include Lobo in this movie, whose note was that? Was it James Gunn's? Was it the studio's? We don't know. James Gunn hyped the script up so much, so what happened? Was the original draft much stronger? Did it change throughout production? Were there rewrites? I don't know either. But I have a hard time believing the finished script is identical to the version Gunn was praising, especially considering that Nogueira is now writing both Teen Titans and Wonder Woman movies. I'll admit, after seeing Supergirl, I'm a little more cautious than I was before, but like I said, in James Gunn we trust. I'm hoping the reception to this movie helps shape those future projects in a positive way. I don't dislike Supergirl. There are a lot of things in this movie that kept me engaged, but it also feels incomplete. There was real potential in Kara's struggle with grief and identity, and just as much potential in her relationship with Ruthie. I just don't think the movie fully delivers on either of those threads. Despite all this, I'm still incredibly excited to see Millie Alcock's Supergirl again, because even if the movie itself doesn't fully work for me, this version of Kara absolutely does.